the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. It is Thursday, April 2nd, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Tomorrow, of course, is Good Friday, the start of Passover. Saturday, we're having a lunar eclipse. They're going to call it a blood moon because it's not quite complete blackout there. And, of course, Sunday is Easter, and all the numerology and astrology people are out there trying to make sense of all of that stuff. We're going to try and make sense of the real world here. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Don is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, the big news, you heard it on the SRN News Break, the negotiators were able to complete a framework deal regarding Iran's nuclear technology and the sanctions. And they went a day over the deadline. And, of course, this agreement is going to make a lot of people very unhappy. Netanyahu's probably coughing up feathers right now. John McCain is pounding his head into the marble they've got all over Washington, D.C. And we're already seeing commentary all over the corporate media. This was not enough. They should have gone for more. This doesn't address this concern, doesn't address this concern. Well, you're not part of the negotiations and you weren't there, but this is not going to make anybody happy. Now, what's important, we're starting to hear a lot of people saying, well, there was nothing finalized. There wasn't supposed to be. The final deal deadline is July 1st. This was supposed to be a framework agreement for that July 1st deadline, and they got that. And Obama is out there, saying it's an historic agreement and going on and on about, how somehow this represents his victory, which in a way it does. It represents his victory over those members of the Congress who were trying to get war with Iran going. And what was really amazing is watching Obama stand there talking about how, Iran is being kept from having a nuclear weapon and how important it is to keep nuclear weapons out of the Middle East. And then remembering that absolutely shameful display that he put on during his first press conference as president when Helen Thomas asked him point blank, what nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And Obama did not answer, danced around the question, kicked Helen Thomas out of the White House press corps. And now we know, because of that document recently declassified, the U.S. government has known all along Israel is a nuclear-armed state. The U.S. government spent your tax dollars to help Israel build hydrogen bombs. Those are the big ones that take out entire cities in a single flash of light. And Fox News, which is very pro-Republican, pro-war, was out there saying, well, allowing Iran to continue building nuclear weapons will trigger a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Well, there's two problems with that. First of all, Israel's already got nuclear weapons. Why isn't that triggering a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, considering that Israel's constantly attacking its neighbors? And second, to date, nobody has found any evidence Iran is building a bomb. Even Israel's Mossad says, no, what they're working on is the stuff they're allowed to have under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, I would like to remember those people over at Fox News, not that they listen to me, of course, how Israel got caught trying to sell a clandestine nuclear weapon to South Africa. And I put the link up to the story that includes the actual documents that were found after South Africa changed its government, where Israel was trying to sell them a nuclear weapon and probably doing the same elsewhere around the world. There's the so-called Vela incident, where one of the earlier nuclear monitoring satellites by the U.S. picked up the unique double flash signature of an atmospheric nuclear detonation. And the evidence pointed to South Africa and Israel. And, of course, more recently, we do have that declassified report confirming the U.S. government knows and has been helping Israel build nuclear weapons since the 1970s. But Iran's the problem. Israel's nuclear weapons are good, and Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons are bad. Remember when they were screaming at us how Saddam had nuclear weapons? This is more of the same. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I thought John Kerry and then Jeb Bush had the biggest flip-flop collection, but I think the United States has the biggest flip-flop collection. I just don't trust. I mean, they keep saying don't trust Iran, don't trust. It's like, tell that to the Russians why NATO's moving like so close to their borders. Now, then say, who do you trust, you know?
Well, Iran's got a very good reason not to trust the United States because, remember, during the P5+1 preliminary deal, Iran complied with all the requirements. The U.S. had committed to reducing the sanctions, and they didn't. They went the other way. So it's the United States that is distrusted around the world here. And I imagine today, tomorrow, all over the weekend, we're going to see, well, John Bolton's already been on the air screaming about, this was a mistake. We just need to go bomb them. All right, John, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute.
Strap them to the first bomb, just like on Dr. Strangelove. Hey, John, you want to go? We'll drop you on the first one.
Give him a cowboy hat and let him go yee-haw all the way down.
As long as his mustache don't get in the way of the...
Oh, there's a lot of aerodynamic drag on that. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that. We're going to have to reprogram the autopilot to deal with that.
Yeah, this whole deal, as great as it is, I just think there's something fishy going on.
Well, you need this is politics and public relations because all this is a deal saying what the final deal will be about. And they were just simply saying, this will be an issue for the final deal. And, of course, Israel was screaming that Iran needed to put all their long-range and medium-range rockets in there, which was never part of the issue. The reason we're in this mess is everybody was screaming, we think Iran's building a nuclear bomb. We have no proof of it. We've ginned up a lot of phony proof, but everybody discovered it was phony. But, with Israel having hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons, including hydrogen bombs, their agenda is not concerned that Iran is going to attack them because Iran is not that stupid. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another nation in over 200 years. What Israel wants is the unquestioned authority to wage war against the Arab nations and not have them able to fight back. Now remember, when we were all little tiny kids, our parents' generation was sold on the need of this very expensive U.S. nuclear arsenal as a deterrent. We will never use them on anybody else, but if we have them, we will not be attacked. Okay? Well, if the United States is entitled to a nuclear deterrent, why isn't Iran? Especially because Iran does have a regional rival that is nuclear armed with a history of belligerence against its neighboring nations. I think it's time to go. I think the question ought to be, why shouldn't Iran have a nuclear bomb? So they can go on not having to fight wars of conquest. And they'll basically say to Israel, look, you go play elsewhere, you don't invade us.
Yeah, it balances out, balance of power.
Yeah. Balance of power,
they
mutually assured destruction. I mean.
Yep, they should. I don't see, who are we to tell another country what they can or, it's.
Well, because we've got bigger bombs than they do, and with bigger bombs comes the right to tell the rest of the world how to behave. I mean, that was the attitude being put out by the Project for the New American Century back in the 1990s. They were the policy institute that said, look, the U.S. is the remaining superpower on Earth. Let's go out and act like one and make all the world America.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go, and we've got a phone call waiting. I'm not going to have enough time to be able to take it before the commercial break. So, John in Barbados, just take a deep breath, drink some coffee. We're going to come back to you after this next commercial break. And, of course, even with this agreement signed, remember, yesterday, U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter was out there saying that even if a deal was reached, doesn't mean we're not going to go ahead and bomb Iran. Because we know that's the real goal. Bomb Iran, put in a new government, put in a brand new private central bank, make sure the oil is sold only for U.S. dollars, remove Israel's regional political rival. And they're a little late to the gate here because the new king of Saudi Arabia is playing hardball, and he's now got 22 Arab nations aligned with him. Iran is not the problem here. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, of course, the Warhawks are very unhappy that a deal was announced because they were all set to go. And we could still see Congress next week come in and say, well, we're going to vote crippling sanctions against Iran. We don't care what Obama's agreed to. And if they have a veto-proof majority, that's going to set up a real crisis. And, again, there's a lot of things Obama has done I don't agree with. Obamacare, human-caused global warming, immigration. Actually, the list of things I agree with is very, very thin indeed. However, in this case, under the Constitution, and just under common sense, Congress is acting badly in their service to Tel Aviv. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Just before the break, you mentioned Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And the Yemen conflict.
Yes.
Now, bombing the Russian embassy is actually bombing Russian territory. That's an act of war.
Yes.
Now, following that, the Saudis refused to allow Russia to evacuate its personnel. But China goes in there with 2 warships and armed men on the ground in Yemen for their own nationals out, and I'm sure they'll bring the Russians out. So I wonder what Mr. Putin will be saying once his people are out of Yemen when Saudi Arabia bombed Russian territory. I think the Saudis had better be a little bit circumspect. We know why they agreed to China, because of all the oil they sell to China. That's why they allowed the Chinese in. But Russia is a competitor in the oil business. So we're looking at something really strange going on here. We could see a little stir between Saudi and Russia. I mean, Saudi already threatened with Prince Bandar to disrupt the Sochi Games last year. And what effect did that have? We don't know, but I'm sure Mr. Putin is weighing things up very carefully.
Yeah, he's not a rash individual, and you know it's kind of interesting, this bombing by accident. Trust us, we don't make mistakes, and they do. The Saudis bombed a dairy factory, they bombed a refugee camp, but remember back during the Yugoslavia conflict when the U.S. bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade? Feels like the same thing is going on here, that, it's a tit for tat or thumbing the nose of, or there may have been some strategic reason where they thought the Russian consulate was passing information or something. I don't think any of these consulates are bombed by accident. I think they're all definitely deliberate.
Well, with Russian bases in Tartus, Syria, they're well within range of Riyadh and what have you, so they better be very careful. The next thing I want to say about this agreement on Iran's nuclear facilities between the P5+1. The P5+1 actually is a UN-sponsored body.
Yes.
It will be the UN that ratifies. It'll have nothing to do with your Congress, your Senate. They can do what the hell they like. The UN will decide, and if the UN lifts the sanctions, bye-bye America.
I wish it were that cut and dried, because, they're still talking about sanctions imposed by Europe and by the United States, and the UN can lift their sanctions, the European Union can lift their sanctions. The U.S. can just say, well, we're acting, unilaterally outside the UN, we're going to sanction Iran. Of course, the reality is what that means is that business opportunities with Iran for American businesses will be off limits, and that vacuum will be filled by European countries and countries from the rest of the world. For the U.S. to continue sanctions against Iran, if everybody else is lifting them, is basically going to be a hardship on our already overstressed economy. But right now, we've got way too many people in the Congress where they wake up every morning, they dive into Tel Aviv and say, yes, we will do what Netanyahu tells us, and Netanyahu doesn't care what harm is being brought to the United States of America by his policies. He just wants Americans to pay Israel's bills, give them weapons, and fight their battles for them.
Well, since the admission that Israel's a nuclear-armed nation, it's against the foreign appropriations and the Symington Amendment and several others.
Well, what's really interesting about that is Israel's spokesmen are still maintaining their policy of nuclear ambiguity. We're not saying that we have nuclear weapons, and everybody who says we does, they're just being anti-Semitic Jew haters who want Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies to death. And here in the United States of America, even though the U.S. government declassified that document, and even though there's a whole body of other evidence, the South African documents, the Vela incident, Mordecai Vanunu's photos, the U.S. government's official policy is still to nuclear ambiguity. And, of course, they're looking like an equine derriere standing up there maintaining this fiction when we all know the reality of what's going on. But at this point, they're trapped by their own lies. They have to maintain all the fictions. They can't back off any one of them and say, yeah, we were lying to you all this time, or the whole house of cards is going to fall down sooner than they'd like it to.
Well, I think the house of cards is already on its way down. The world economy has taken another negative turn.
It really is, and, you know, it may turn out to be a little harder for the King of Saudi to maintain this 22 Arab nation coalition, because more and more of those nations are standing up and saying, wait a minute, why is Saudi Arabia invading Yemen when Yemen has not attacked Saudi Arabia? And, of course, the reason is they want this U.S.-friendly, Saudi-friendly leader back in. But that's not a legitimate reason to go to war. It is a war of aggression. When you go into a country to force a new leader on them, that's a war. It doesn't matter who the guy is. This is an aggressive war. That is a war crime.
Well, with all the hundreds of millions of dollars of weaponry that's in Yemen, courtesy of USA, it looks like a ground invasion could be more problematic than they are dreaming of.
Well, it is going to be more problematic. First of all, the Yemenite people have the home court advantage. They know the place to a degree that you cannot just looking at satellite photos. And remember, these people in Yemen are fighting for not just their lives, their homes, and their loved ones right around them. And that gives them a psychological advantage over these foreign troops who are just there for a paycheck.
And Yemen, of course, is not a flat desert. It is a mountainous country.
Right.
And that will make it twice as difficult to get through.
Well, I do understand that the people of Yemen did finally succeed in capturing the entire presidential palace in Aden. For all the talk about these bombings and airstrikes and, we blew up the cottage cheese factory. Are we not Butch? It doesn't look like it's going as smoothly as they were hoping it was going to. And again, going back to something I said earlier in the week, what's going on here is that all of these rulers of countries will gladly fight with each other over which elite rules which nation, but the one thing they can be counted on to unite against is the people of a nation taking back control of their own country. They can't let that build up any momentum or it's going to spread across the globe. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm watching on Fox News, and they've already shifted gears. You know, they didn't get Iran deal fails, launched the war. Now they're back to radical Islam is a threat across the globe, and they're going after the Christians, and they're doing this and they're doing that. Well, let's bring up the subject about radical Christianity. The Inquisition, the witch burnings, unholy crusades all over the Middle East, and what's going on in Indiana. They're looking for anything they can use to sell you a new world war, even if they have to go back to the Crusades and we'll all have Templar symbols on our armor as we march off in the name of the deity. And my opinion about that is if the deity wants something dead or somebody dead, he can arrange it himself. He doesn't need me to go out and do his killing for him, or you or your children here. We're going to grab a phone call here. Matthew in Baltimore. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Rivero. Do you mean wearing a big white robe with a red cross on it and just coming and murdering people wouldn't be cool for you or anything?
No, it wouldn't be, actually. You know,
bummer. Okay.
You know, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I like swords. I think they're cool. I was on my college fencing team. I've done sword choreography for stage plays and a couple of TV shows and stuff, but I'm not real big on killing other people unless they're trying to kill me, and of course that's a whole different set of rules. But I have never met any Muslim who I felt was a threat to me personally. And I can't say that the same for other religions. In fact, when I was in college, I had this girl I was dating got kidnapped by the children of God, and she was never seen again. And the FBI, after 3 months of looking for her, just assumed that she was out there buried in a shallow grave in the desert somewhere, because they were doing that sort of thing back then.
I'd have to agree with you. I've never actually met a Muslim I felt threatened by at this point. But what I wanted to bring up was the whole Jade Helm thing going on. I had an idea. Mm-hmm. Anything short of violent revolution, right? I guess everyone everywhere should have their video camera, cell phone picture, every recording device known to man. And if any of this stuff is taking place anywhere near you, videotape it, film it, take pictures of it, and post it everywhere. So that way, if you're in one of these 10 states, you can show the other 40 exactly what's going on. Because I think the only way that, we're going to be able to show this event, if it really takes place, and if it takes place on the scale that they're talking about it, the only way we're going to be able to, incite the rest of the country to be angry about it, as well they should be, is to make sure that we accurately and, honestly document what's going on. If you have Black Hawk helicopters flying around in your neighborhood, or if you're close enough to get some video footage of, military guys running around the street, well then, hey, there's no reason in the universe why we can't capture this on video.
No, there isn't any reason at all. And what I would do is recommend, it's not the uniformed soldiers in vehicles and aircraft that are the real area of concern. The area of concern is how they're basically saying they're going to be sending thousands and thousands of undercover people, soldiers, intelligence agents, whatever, just dressed like ordinary people in non-military vehicles, and they're going to be trying to infiltrate all these communities all across these states. Why are they doing that? Okay, and there's a couple of different reasons.
We know why they're doing it.
Well, there's a couple of competing theories on that. One is that they're going to go on in and just try and identify potential troublemakers. The other one is that having seen the federal government try and fan up some kind of a national riot situation at Ferguson, Trayvon Martin, and Adam Kokesh's armed march into Washington, D.C., this may be the big plan, to have all of these undercover people go into the communities, stay there long enough to be accepted as part of the community, and they start saying, I'm with this or that militia, I'm with this or that patriot, I'm pro-constitutional, and then all of a sudden they start shooting in all directions. To create the illusion that there is an armed rebellion underway inside the United States government, whereupon Washington, D.C. can say, oh, well, there's your national emergency there, and we've got to take extraordinary steps, and we've got to suspend the Constitution, we've got to shut down independent media on the Internet, because they're fanning the flames of violence, which we don't do around here. But that's a worst-case scenario. I don't think they're going to...
As much of the military is overseas and garrisoning the rest of the world, I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want nor desire a confrontation with the military, the DHS, or the police, the militarized police. But I think they would do that at their peril. I really hope that the American people would have to put their foot down and say enough is enough, and take action. And I'm not supporting violence. I don't want to see it for my sake, for my children's sake, for the rest of the American people's sake. But if they try something to that effect, I don't know if they really have the numbers to win out against an angry American people.
Well,
I hope I'm right.
Well, I hope they'll take that into consideration, because they could literally start a civil war with a stunt like that. We know, unfortunately, history tells us that when a tyrant takes power, there's always a segment of the population that will be his or her useful idiots and go on out and do what they're supposed to do for the government because they think they're in the right. We also know from history that it takes an awful lot to rouse a population against its own government. Remember, the American Revolution was fought with about 1/3 of the popular support of the people in the colony. And so it's a very, very dicey situation. But the important thing is, if somebody just shows up in your neighborhood with a buzz cut in the next few weeks, and starting to be all buddy-buddy, and, hey, we just moved here, and, I'm out of the military.
I'll invite him over for some tea.
Yeah, and that's the people you take the pictures of. And then you compare them with the pictures of the violence after, should violence start.
Well, I don't have to worry about everything in the state of Maryland is documented by this ginormous military balloon that we have there. It hangs in the sky like a big Orwellian eyeball. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I'm aware of it. And,
it's actually pretty spooky. If you live in Maryland, like I do, and you drive pretty much anywhere in Maryland, if you look at a certain direction in the sky, if the sky is clear, you see the big, Orwell eye. Keeping watch on you. It's really, really fun.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, we're in a surveillance state. There's no doubt about it. And again, I'm not advocating violent revolution, but a lot of people are right now, and I can't say that I blame them. You know, I'd like to avoid it.
I thought maybe I would put up my own balloon down on Pennsylvania Avenue and point a camera at the White House. Do you think they would be okay with that? Because
I don't think so.
I mean, fair is fair, right? I mean, if they
No. There's no fair. There's no fair is fair in Washington D.C. They want to spy on you all the time, even in the bedroom of your home. But you know, you have no business looking into the business of the White House or Congress. You know, that's private and secure.
I'm kind of a heavy guy, so if they really want to spy on me in my bedroom, God love them.
Well, all I can say is for all you model rocket enthusiasts who are living underneath that giant balloon, there's something you might want to think about.
You have a great day. I'm joking. But, you know, we already went through the balloon experience in World War I. They really don't stay up very long once the shooting actually starts. You know, and the great thing is that is in an area of Maryland called Harford County.
Yes.
Which a lot of people that live outside of Harford County nickname Harford-tucky. And, just because there's a lot of, you know, the redneck, quote unquote, type people that live in Harford-tucky. And, I hope that they maybe, do a little target practice.
Well, you know, you got those redneck engineers on that TV show, you know. You know, I have a feeling when things start to happen, you're going to find a lot of inventiveness and innovation in the American people. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And somebody just emailed me a story over in the UK Independent. Same media that told us back in 2000 that snowfalls are a thing of the past because of human-caused global warming. And the headline on the story is, Russia threatens to use nuclear force over Crimea and the Baltic states, and it opens up saying that Russia is threatening to use nuclear weapons to protect its annexation of Crimea. So we know this doesn't actually come from Russia, because Russia didn't annex Crimea. Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine, then voted to merge with Russia. And you dig a little further into this story, and the entire story is based on notes an American observer supposedly made witnessing some kind of a meeting somewhere else. You could never even go into a court of law with this. It's hearsay at best. But the UK Independent is running it as if it's an absolute fact. And I'm going to give you guys a little benchmark. When you're listening to the media, and they're reporting on something that really happened, they're very careful to choose their words. They'll say, allegedly, you know, has been thought to. They're basically trying to not get into a situation where they can be sued if the report is wrong. But when they're selling you propaganda, it's always absolute. This is what's going on. There's no question. This is that. So look for that little giveaway. And this story is just full of it. Oh, yeah, it's absolute truth. This guy heard it over here, passed it over here. It must be true. We're going to take ourselves another phone call. Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm just looking at everything, and it seems like the U.S. is now the new Nazi Germany.
Just picked up on that, did you?
What's that?
I said just picked up on that, did you?
No, but the more I look at it, everything's become so uncanny. The way Nazi Germany was before the war and how we're becoming.
Oh, you're absolutely right here. I think the U.S. government has been reading Dictatorship for Dummies by Adolf Hitler. We've got concentration camps. We've got spying on the citizens. We have the use of torture. We have lies used to start wars. You know, I mean, I will grant the Nazis had better-looking uniforms, but then they actually hired a top fashion designer to design all their uniforms. So
not only that, they had just like today, they had the Zionists taking over the politics and television, and just like over here, high-ranking positions, the banks, social welfare at an all-time high, unemployment. Now, do you think Hitler was set up to fail?
No, not from his own point of view, but he was definitely maneuvered into the situation where if you go back and you read some of Winston Churchill's statements that he was making on radio and in the media in Great Britain in the 1930s, where he was saying, we will force this war on Germany whether they want it or not, because Germany, especially after the Nazis came to power and they kicked out the private central bank and established a value-based currency, Germany's economy took off. It was called the German Miracle. Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year in, I think it was 1937, because of this amazing transformation of the Weimar Republic, inflation and poverty, into a nation that was industrializing like crazy. And for all those nations still enslaved to private central banks, that was a major threat. And that was a big part of trying to isolate Germany and set up the stage for them to be destroyed. I mean, there was this huge global boycott, under the headline, Judea declares war on Germany. And they tried to organize a boycott of Germany to wreck their economy, because the bottom line is economies that are enslaved to private central banks cannot compete against free economies. And it's absolutely impossible. And that is why the private central bank nations are always coming down on any nation that is trying to make, issue their own money through the government. They were down on the original United States of America. They were down on Lincoln for his greenback. I imagine right now they're trying to figure out some way to sell us a new invasion of Iceland, because Iceland has now restored money creation authority to the government.
Yeah, you just look at the U.S. and it seems like we're going down the exact same path.
Yeah, we are. We absolutely are. And, we're one Reichstag fire away from, a complete transformation of our nation from the republic that so many people sacrificed their lives for, into, you're right, the new Nazi power.
I mean, look how hated we are around the world.
Yes.
It's such a shame. It really is. To be led down this path,
Well, I prefer to think of it as we're being dragged down the path, because I certainly am not going willingly, and I don't think very many other people are as well.
No.
My concern though, is that just like Germany lost World War II for being the way they were behaving, I think ultimately the United States is going to lose this World War. But for the bankers who are backing all of this, they don't care who wins or loses. They make huge amounts of money off of war. Loaning money to both sides to fight the war, loaning money to both sides to rebuild after the war. They don't care which side wins or loses. That's why you had Brown Brothers Harriman in New York City funding Adolf Hitler's rise to power, right up until the day war broke out, at which point Roosevelt nailed them under the Trading with the Enemies Act.
Yeah, and it seems like we're going to be thrown away, just like, they used us. They got what they want, and they're going to throw us away when everything's said and done, if they have anything to do with it.
I'm afraid you are right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully it's not going to turn out that way. I mean, hopefully enough people will wake up in time to put a stop to all this, because it's ugly. It really is.
It very much is. It's very, very depressing. I was, child of the 50s. I'm a baby boomer, and I was kind of hoping that I was going to get through my life without seeing a world war, but unfortunately, I think we're already in it. We're just missing the really big bang where everybody wakes up and says, oh, yeah, it's a world war now. Everybody's fighting everybody.
Yeah, and we just can't allow the Zionists to, when everything's said and done.
They're just one player. Let's not dump the whole blame on them. They're one player. They're a major player. But, behind it you have the military-industrial complex. You have the corruptibility of politicians. And, again, I think future history, I think 50 years from now, the world is going to look on the Stars and Stripes with the same revulsion our generation was taught to look on the swastika. And I really don't want that for future generations of Americans, but Washington, D.C. doesn't listen to me. I mean, other than I'm sure they have somebody listening, taking notes and saying, that Rivero, he said this.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. All right, Mike. I just want to draw the comparisons, and it's just uncanny. It's like history repeating itself, really is.
Yeah, who was it who said history never repeats, but it certainly rhymes from time to time? I think that was Mark Twain.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Coming up on the top of the news hour, very alarming story coming out of the Jewish Chronicle. Israel resigned to possibility of Iran strikes. This came out before the announcement of the P5+1 framework agreement. And this article is quoting a senior Israeli official saying that, the immediate implication of a completed deal will be increased Israeli surveillance of Iran's nuclear installations and the threat of a military attack. Now, Israel, every time they attack somebody, oh, it's their fault. They made us do it, Mommy. They fired a bottle rocket at us. You know, we can't let them reach this or they'll attack us. And, you know, let's be honest. Israel's batting zero at finding other nuclear weapon programs in the Middle East. They completely were wrong about Iraq's power station at Osirak. They were completely wrong about the facility they bombed in Syria. And I would not rule out Netanyahu launching an attack against Iran as early as the Passover holiday, because he did give that order back in 2012, and it was only his military top commanders who dug in their heels and said, look, this is illegal, it's going to create a wider regional war, and we're not going to obey this order to attack Iran without the full consent of the cabinet, which they couldn't get. So we know Netanyahu wants an attack. He wants to strike Iran, then stand back and let America send our kids in to protect Israel from retaliation. And our government is already committed to supporting Israel in a war, even if Israel starts the war. And so what does Netanyahu have to lose by bombing Iran's power station? Absolutely nothing. It gets him the war he wants. It gets Iran destroyed, which is what he wants. And he doesn't care how many Americans have to die in it. That's what they're there for. To be used up as chips in the great game, to paraphrase Henry Kissinger. All righty. Israel is also testing their latest and greatest missile shield, which means they're getting ready. They're getting ready. We got to take a break for news. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Now, over in Great Britain, Sir Bob Russell, he's a top British member of Parliament, has come out saying Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal. He was talking about how Palestine has now joined the International Criminal Court, and Russell got up and basically said the Palestinians are subjected to apartheid, ethnic cleansing, a breach in international law, the Geneva Conventions, and all the United Nations resolutions that Israel continues to defy. And he's saying Israel cannot go on behaving in the way it has for the last 20 to 30 years. The current leader of Israel is a war criminal any way you look at it. Now, one of the problems I have with the government of Israel is that because their nation is justified in their religious beliefs, they're still behaving like an Old Testament kingdom, smiting each other, and I think that's a little out of touch in the 21st century, especially with nuclear weapons. Now, according to a story over in 12160, the Israeli army has now basically admitted that, yes, they're supplying Al-Qaeda in Syria against Assad. People have been saying, why isn't Al-Qaeda, which is supposed to be this fanatical, radical Islam group, why did they never attack Israel? Well, because they're working for Israel. Just like ISIS is actually working for the United States. They're trying to create enemies for you to hate, to trick you out of your money and the lives of your children. And the good news is they're not getting a lot of traction. Because of the continuing clashes in Syria, Jordan has been forced to close their border. They don't want somebody else's war spilling into their country. Unfortunately, I think it's ultimately going to happen anyway. Now, last October, Poroshenko, when he was doing one of his rah-rah speeches that we're good, they're bad, made a quote, our children will go to schools in kindergartens while theirs will be holed up in basements. And so far, it's probably the only promise he's kept. Because the children over in Donbass are, in fact, being kept at home in hiding because of the constant shelling that's going on. Kiev has shelled schools in eastern Ukraine. Now, there's another article here from Journal Neo. Kiev commits energy harakiri. And it's basically talking about the fact that the war bill in Kiev has just gone through the roof. All of this new money that's being poured in by the IMF, and it's not a gift, it's a loan. It's evaporating, which tends to happen in a war. And ultimately it says that one of the concessions IMF is demanding from Poroshenko is to open the borders of Ukraine to foreign banks and multinationals to basically use Ukraine up. And that's another reason why other nations are turning away from the dollar, turning away from the IMF, is because the U.S. government uses the dollar and the IMF as instruments of foreign policy. They've weaponized the global economy. Yes, we know you're terribly in debt, and we'll loan you the money to keep going a little bit longer, but you have to let our GMO corporations come in. You have to let our fracking corporations come in. And the rest of the world is resenting that. Now, there was a story that came out a couple of places 2 days ago, and it's clearly propaganda. May have been an April Fool's joke. That was my first guess when I read it. And the headline reads, Russian military expert urges nuke Yellowstone and destroy America. And we're hearing all this stuff about Russia's belligerence and Russia's aggression, and this certainly fits that. But I dismissed it as an April Fool's joke. But just on the off chance somebody was seriously trying to sell this idea, you need to remember, a little bit of science here, the very top of the Yellowstone magma chamber is about 5 miles deep under the earth, under the park. There is no bomb that can punch through to that. Even the Soviet Union Tsar bomb, the most powerful atomic weapon ever detonated, could not get anywhere near the magma chamber. So whoever came up with this doesn't know nuclear weapons, doesn't know geology. It's just like, let's come up with something that we can claim the Russians are saying to get the American people ready to go to war. This one didn't work either. Interestingly enough, over at Sputnik News, they're reporting on a scathing article in the German newspapers that is basically declaring that Merkel's anti-Russian front in the European Union is falling apart because Merkel has been leading the charge about we've got to do sanctions, we've got to fortify, we've got to do the rest of this. And the gist of the German article is that more and more European countries they want out of this deal. They want the Russian sanctions over. It has cost them dearly. There were 6,000 businesses in Germany alone doing business with the Russian republics that got that revenue stream cut off. And Europe understands if this whole Ukraine situation goes forward, they're looking at a new world war on their front lawns. They've already been through 2 of them. They don't want a third one. So it's starting to fall apart. Anyway, let's see. Over in Yemen, Saudi Arabia's Navy now controls all Yemen ports. The UN Human Rights Office in Geneva is continuing to talk about all the civilian casualties. The Saudis are refusing humanitarian relief from getting into Yemen. This is a war not on a political group. It's not on the Houthis. This is a war on the people of Yemen for daring to get the idea that they should be in charge of their own country. That's going to get everybody aligned together. Israel, Saudi Arabia, buddy-buddy, giving each other wet, sloppy kisses. You know, the rulership of the nations of the world belongs to the ruling elite. We're not going to have some new Constitution and Declaration of Independence in Yemen. Look at all the trouble that was caused by that one over in the North American continent all those centuries ago here. As of this coming Monday, the U.S. Navy will join in the strikes against positions in Yemen, because when the U.S. goes to all that trouble and expense to install a puppet ruler over your country, you will just go on obeying that puppet ruler, or we will do bad things to you. As I mentioned to that caller earlier, the Yemen's revolutionary forces, the people of Yemen, have completed seizing the Aden presidential palace, and apparently they're going after that private central bank. They want to tear that one down. Now, of course, Hadi is not there. He's over in Saudi Arabia. He's a ruler in exile. Yemen is warning of a crushing response to an enemy ground offensive, and again, they'll have the upper hand. They know the terrain, they have the home court advantage, and they're fighting for their lives, their families, their homes, all within eyesight. That gives a decided psychological advantage to them. Go into Yemen, we still can't get out of Iraq. Still can't get out of Afghanistan. Now, there are reports of dozens of foreign troops disembarking at the Yemen Aden port. Now, the early reports were saying foreign fighters without identifying them. It turns out that at least most of them are Chinese troops to evacuate Chinese nationals from Yemen. Probably a really, really good idea. And over in Saudi Arabia, Ali Al-Ahmad, executive director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs, has come out and said, look, why is Saudi Arabia attacking Yemen? Yemen has not fired a single bullet at Saudi Arabia. It is a war of aggression. And a war of aggression is the ultimate war crime. That was something everybody at Nuremberg agreed with. All right, we're going to be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about events in Europe, in Russia, and Ukraine. And I'm looking at this story coming out of Russia today. Romania will host NATO heavy arms if asked, as they support every venture. And so they're arming up Europe. They're getting it garrisoned, ready to go. And when you have those kinds of weapons standing around and people glaring at each other, mistakes can happen, and we could be into disaster before we know it. And that is illustrated by a very interesting story that came out of Paul Greg Roberts earlier today. And the gist of the story is a Japanese news agency just revealed a long-held secret of the United States as to just how close we came to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And apparently when there was a U-2 spy plane that was shot down over Cuba and a nuclear missile battery on Okinawa received a valid launch command. And just like the opening scenes from the movie War Games, the crew of that missile battery said, wait a minute, I know it's the correct order, it's got all the authentication codes, what's going on? And they were suspicious because the target package not only included targets in Russia, but other countries as well with which we were not in a state of belligerence. So they held off and they double-checked, and it turned out, and again, just like another movie, fail-safe. There'd been a system failure, and the order was issued erroneously. And thank goodness there were some people with some common sense in that silo, or the U.S. would have launched a nuclear strike against Russia. Russia would have counterattacked. That would have been it. And when you go back and you look at all the near misses the U.S. has had with their nuclear weapons, the code name is a broken arrow. Loss or release of a nuclear weapon not connected with an act of war. Like the one that came down in South Carolina, where if this one switch had been in the other position, the bomb would have detonated. These are very dangerous weapons. Of course, they're supposed to be. We're always being assured, oh, there's the fail-safe system, there's this, there's that. And there have been some real near misses with these things. By the way, apparently, after all these years, they finally located that missing hydrogen bomb off the Savannah, Georgia. It's been down there for a long time, and I'm sure the Savannah residents were not sleeping all that well after it was initially lost, wondering if the seawater gets in and shorts it out, what's going to happen. But apparently they have actually succeeded in locating that. Over in Thailand, there's been a junta. The Thai people were already under martial law. Now the junta has drawn absolute power to itself. And not good for the people in Thailand here. Over in the Falkland Islands, there's been a new complication. Apparently, large reserves of oil and natural gas have been discovered off the Falkland Islands. And, of course, this is going to ramp up the question of just who owns the archipelago. I remember it was back in, I think, the late 1980s, the Falkland Islands War. Britain went in and reasserted their sovereignty over the Falkland Islands and the British subjects thereon, most of whom were sheep. I mean, real sheep, 4 legs, wool, farm animals. But now with oil and gas on the line, there could be another Falkland Islands war. War everywhere. It's a world war. Everybody's going to war. Everybody thinks war is their best option. Meanwhile, another story coming out about how the Pentagon can't account for $45 billion it spent in Afghanistan. I'm sure they're not too concerned. It's not like it's their own money they're spending. And meanwhile, down in Mexico, the U.S. has provided $2.5 billion in financial aid, but it's also, at your expense, supplying Mexico with battle rifles, Humvees, helicopters, night vision gear. All these weapons going out. Sooner or later, somebody's going to pull a trigger, somebody will return fire, and we'll be off and running here. Now, over in China, we're going to talk about the economy a little bit here. Chinese railroad stocks are soaring with the growth in membership of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. There are now 46 nations signed on to this, and its primary initial project is what they're calling the New Silk Road, an ultra-high-speed rail system that will link China with Europe, following pretty much the path of the original Silk Road, caravan route. And so the railroads are going to get a lot of money out of this deal, and everybody's buying the railroad stocks. And a lot of these countries signing on to AIIB are erstwhile U.S. allies, but they're ready to get out of the dollar. They're ready to be free of the IMF. And there's really not much the U.S. can do to stop them because these are friendly nations. How are you going to convince the American people to sacrifice the lives of their children in wars on countries that we're supposed to be friends with, like Denmark and Australia? We've got to go get those Aussies. There's ISIS in the Sydney Opera House. We've got to attack right now. Story out of Investment Watch blog. If Greece leaves the Eurozone, which is looking more and more likely, can Portugal stay? Because looking at all the numbers in Portugal, they're in as much trouble with their debt to the European Central Bank as Greece. And they're talking now about the Grexit contagion. If Greece says, I'm out of here, other nations are ready to do that. And the whole European Union will fall apart, and the New World Orderists are going to be banging their heads into the woodwork. Because what they wanted to do was multiple stages. We're going to form Europe into a single European Union. We're going to form Mexico, the United States, and Canada into a single union. We're going to form these other countries down here into a single union. Then we'll take all those unions and force them into a single global government. Speaking of Greece, there are protests by pensioners against the possibility of a return of austerity. And Tsipras is in a rough spot. Of course, he did want the job. But Tsipras cannot accede to Germany's, ECB's, European Commission's, the Troika's demands, or there'll be riots in his country. And the ECB can't back off their demands that Greece honor the old payment schedule, because the instant they cut Greece any slack on the debt, all the other member nations in Europe are going to want exactly the same thing, and there won't be a legitimate reason for the ECB to refuse. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Iceland once again is showing the way. Following the 2008 meltdown and economic crash, they started tossing their crooked bankers in prison. Good thing to do. They wrote off all the debt created through fraud. Another good thing to do. Iceland's economy is doing very well, and now they're taking the step of returning authority to create currency back to the government. They're taking it away from the banks. We need that here as well. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting on back to the economy in Greece. They're coming up on a major payment on April 9th, which at this point they're unable to make because they can't borrow new money to make the payments on the old money. And the Troika will not loan them the money to make the payments on the old money until Greece goes back to austerity and letting the place get looted by the powers that run these banks. There are also interest payments due on the 17th and 20th. And so at this point, it looks like a default by Greece is inevitable. Now, estimates of the total derivatives exposure to Europe on Wall Street are running about $90 trillion. So we're probably just an apportionment, if you will. We're talking maybe 4 to 5 trillion are derivatives sold against Greece's debt. When Greece defaults, those derivatives come true. These Wall Street firms do not have $5 trillion in cash set aside to pay these derivatives. Remember, derivatives are not regulated the way regular insurance is. And for those of you who are not clear on the concept, derivatives are financial instruments whose value is based on other financial instruments. And there's a particular derivative called the credit default swap. And it's like an insurance policy. If I invest $10 million in your company, I also spend a few thousand to buy a credit default swap that says that if you go out of business and I lose my $10 million, the credit default swap will reimburse me for a substantial part of that original $10 million. It's a loss mitigation, loss reduction device. Unfortunately, because derivatives are not regulated, I can buy these derivatives on other people's investments that I'm not even a part of. It's like with regular fire insurance, you have to own the asset being insured. I can insure my house against being destroyed by fire, but I can't insure my neighbor's house, because that would give me a motive to sneak over there in the middle of the night with a can of gas and a road flare and burn his house down so I could make some money. But with derivatives, you can do that. The other problem is, with regular insurance companies, they are required by law to keep cash reserves on hand sufficient to pay a reasonably expected number of claims that will come in. Derivatives don't have to do that. The Wall Street firms who were selling these derivatives, they took the money and they just did whatever they wanted to do with it. So when Greece defaults, we're looking at trillions of dollars in derivative calls that are going to be made on Wall Street. Wall Street doesn't have that cash. We know what Wall Street is going to do. They're going to turn around to the U.S. government and say, we need another bailout. We meant well. We didn't mean to mess things up this bad. And the government will say, they're bankers. That's okay. We'll just turn around to the American people and we'll get the $5 trillion from them because they're generous, good-hearted souls, and they know you bankers are good people, and they'll pony up the money. And there are two problems with that. One, we're sick and tired of being the wallet of last resort for Wall Street's greed, corruption, and incompetence. And two, and more to the point, we don't have it. And maybe that's the reason they were trying so hard to get this war going. They can't keep this little Ponzi scheme going much longer. Some experts are saying it's got to implode by September, could implode by the end of April. It really could. Story out of Journal Neo, and we know about the BRICS, we know about the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, we know about the new AIIB. All of these parallel global financial banking systems are being set up. The world is no longer dominated by the U.S. dollar and the IMF. And now there's another one that's coming online, the Eurasian Economic Union. And this is being set up by Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and is opening the doors to Europe. And just like we saw with the AIIB, we're going to see a lot of these countries sign on to this thing. Because right now is a very scary time for your economy to be dependent on the U.S. dollar and the IMF. Now, the corporate media is still out there talking about recovery, recovery, recovery. Right now, there are 92,269,000 Americans willing and able to work who are not in the labor force. This is a 36-year low. Now, the government is still insisting unemployment is only 5 or 5.6%, and they get away with that by taking most of these 92 million who have not been able to find a job for so long they quit looking and saying, all right, well, then we don't count them as unemployed because they're not looking for a job anymore. That's how they do that. 92 million out of a nation with a 300 million population. That's 1/3. And when you realize that most of the American people are either too young to work or too old, that 92 million is a major, major chunk. We have gone way past the Depression of the 1930s in terms of mass unemployment. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. James in Tokyo, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How are you? I hope you took my advice, and you're talking about a lot of serious issues, and well, I hope you could relax a lot more and do something great for Claire, like take her on a trip to Hawaii or something.
That would be easy.
Yeah, it would be easy. With Greece that you mentioned, I don't really care what happens with Greece. I don't care if it's a default or whatever, but I would just recommend that the people there get their money out of the bank account so it's not confiscated.
Well, they're already doing that. The people in Greece are emptying their savings accounts and taking it home.
That's what they really have to do. And like with the money, like just making a comment. I just want to make some comments on some stuff you said. With the money disappearing from Afghanistan, which is probably just to, bribe people not to shoot at the American forces, in a lot of waste. It's a very sad thing that the U.S. wastes so much money and everything, because in Japan there's a lot of waste too, and even the deficit is probably even twice as high as the U.S. But you have a lot of Japan, at least they're not spending all the money on the military, and as a result, they're giving a lot more back to the people. As an instance, when 20 years ago or more, when I got divorced, my ex-wife said she's going to the Japanese word office to get money. I'm like, money for what? I pay you every month a lot of money. You're fine. Because no, but I'll get like $600 a month from the government. $300 for each kid. Every woman gets that in Japan. Every person gets child care. There's like pretty much free health insurance, where compared to America, it's only based on how much you earn. So if you earn nothing, your health insurance is free. If you earn a lot of money, it costs a lot of money. So you get a lot more, when you don't have to spend all the money on wars and bribery.
Greed and corruption and the rest of it. I mean, again, we're getting on back to the situation. The United States has some of the highest taxes in the world. Other nations do have high taxes, but you get something for it. Here in the U.S., you pay the taxes. You're still expected to pay for your own health care, your own education. The roads are crumbling. The bridges are collapsing. Trains are falling off the rails. The water system is not delivering water any longer. And that is a complete and utter failure of the federal government. Because they're supposed to be taking care of us, not foreign powers.
Yeah, especially education, which I think is a major problem in America. I mean,
yeah, it is.
Even economically, you're going to see a huge, student loan default. You're seeing it right now.
It's already happening. James, I'm sorry, I got to cut you off. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back with another caller. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, yesterday was April Fool's Day, and there were a lot of bogus, humorous stories out there. And apparently, one of them was a story about Tesla getting ready to announce a new model car. And it was an April Fool story. But apparently over at Bloomberg, their fast response team saw the headline, didn't read the story, didn't realize it was a joke, and basically blasted out Tesla Motors announcing Tesla Model W to all their investors, who immediately bought Tesla stock, sending it up, huge, massive volume, before everybody realized that they'd all been hoaxed again. I think this sort of undermines this whole idea that Wall Street investors are somehow smarter than the rest of us. We're going to grab a phone call here. James in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. I just thought I'd talk to you about something you mentioned earlier in the program about that nuclear weapon, the hydrogen bomb that had been recently found down off of Savannah. I read that story back a month or so ago when it first came out, that it was some Canadian tourists who were scuba diving that discovered it. And it had been lost since 1958, over 60 some years now, 60
about right.
A while. And it was major weapon. It was a multi-megaton bomb.
Yes.
What was it? MK4, I think, was the code for it. But I took some time after that to look and see how many nuclear weapons have been lost over the years, and it's unbelievable how many have been lost and have yet not been found. It's somewhere between 26 and 34. They don't even know for certain.
Well, when you're a military commander and you lose one of those nuclear weapons, generally you don't want to be forthcoming about it. But they do have a lot of accidents. Some years ago, they were conducting artillery training down here just off of Pearl Harbor with depleted uranium munitions. These were the first time that they were coming online. And apparently somebody messed up. The guns were trained out the wrong direction, and they fired 2 depleted uranium artillery shells inland, and they landed somewhere supposedly just up the street this way. They've never been found. I don't feel like hiking through there with a radiation meter, but yeah, they do make some really dumb mistakes with this stuff.
Yeah. Now those are the ones that have been lost. Now when you get into what may have been stolen and may be in the hands of people who might want to use them, you're getting into a really major area of possible mega terrorism.
Well, the issue here is, when the United States loses a nuclear weapon, they do make a major effort to find it, not only to recover the radioactive material, but to recover the technology as well. There's a very nice gentleman who lives on Oahu named Dr. John Craven, and you've probably seen him on documentaries about submarines and nuclear weapons. He was part of the team that located where Scorpion had gone down, and he was involved in the recovery of 6 nuclear weapons that had fallen onto Spain and the Mediterranean Ocean. Now, obviously, the ones that fell onto Spain were easily recovered, but John Craven helped them figure out where the others that had gone into the Med itself. I think they did succeed in recovering them. But you're absolutely right. There have been weapons that were lost and never recovered again, and always in the back of your mind, you have to be, did somebody get down there and find it and take it away? And is that the reason we're not finding the situation, finding the weapon? But it is a very scary idea. These are weapons that can take out an entire city, and they're treated very recklessly and casually. We still have that story from a few years ago about the air flight at Minot Air Base, where they had 6 live nuclear warheads on the wing pylons, which is not how you transport weapons. You put them on the wing pylons when you're planning on using them, and between takeoff and landing and the rest of it, there were reports 1 nuclear weapon went missing and was all hushed up, and apparently the crew that was on that aircraft have now all since gone to the great beyond, courtesy of suspicious accidents. But there could very well be an unaccounted for nuclear weapon someplace here in the United States of America. And when we think about something happening that will get us all angry and ready to go to war against the rest of the world, having an unimportant city get vaporized is one. Something else we may want to look at would be coming up on the Easter weekend is Israel staging one of their famous false flag attacks against some important Christian shrine, like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is in their territory, and then saying, oh, look what those gosh darn radical Islamists have done today.
Yeah, I'm just afraid that the stakes keep going up. If they do something, they have to come back and do something much more disastrous the next time around.
They're trying to recapture the shock value. Like I said, in terms of some kind of an event associated with Jade Helm, we know this government was trying to kick up something that looked like a mass uprising with Kokesh's armed march into Washington, D.C., Ferguson, Trayvon Martin, and the purpose of all this infiltration that we're seeing in connection with Jade Helm may be to just get a bunch of people into these 10 states who are all saying, oh, I'm part of the Patriot movement, I'm part of the militias, and then they all start shooting at government buildings or something, and Obama has his excuse to declare a national emergency, martial law, and will be fully transformed into, as that earlier caller said, the new Nazi power.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll try not to think about it too much over this weekend, but it's always in the back of your mind.
Yeah, it is. That's why I'm doing tomorrow's show live. A lot of the GCN hosts are going to go with a replay, and I thought about doing it, but I want to be on the air tomorrow just in case something spectacular happens, because the achievement of this deal with Iran today has put a lot more pressure on Netanyahu, and he'll do anything to get what he wants. Okay?
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Coming up on the top of the hour here, interesting Reuters Ipsos poll among Republicans see Obama as a bigger threat to the United States of America than Putin. And proving that he's getting it from both sides of the aisle, Democrats are now trying to drop the blame for China's new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank on Obama. That it was his foreign policy failing that has allowed this bank to be started and all of our allies to join it. Well, I'm sorry, Obama does not get the blame for this one, other than that he shares an equal blame with every other president going back 60 years who have used the dollar, the Federal Reserve, and the IMF as a tool of oppressive foreign policy, which has led to resentment around the world and the political will to set up alternative banking systems. So, we will blame Obama for the things he's done wrong, but in my opinion, this isn't his mistake. He inherited the situation. Another story coming out of immigration. Apparently, Obama is now trying to bring more Central Americans up here, and he's providing free transportation. Well, it's not free. You're paying for it. They're calling it the Central American Minors, and the idea is that illegal immigrants here who have been given amnesty, who happen to be parents, will now have the U.S. government and the taxpayer bring their children up here to the United States of America to become instant democratic voters and eventual soldiers in a war of conquest, I think. I'm still not sure what's going on with this immigration story. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. We got 92 million Americans willing and able to work in this country who cannot find a job, and they're bringing in more unemployed people every day. It doesn't really make a lot of sense at all. But we'll figure it out at some point, I'm sure. Hopefully before it's too late to do anything about it. We're going to take a break for the news. We will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Don is still in our control room and still answering the telephone. Now, as you already heard, Harry Reid will retire from Congress at the end of his term next year. And apparently the plans are already underway for his retirement party because there is a Nevada brothel that is offering to host his retirement party because of his ongoing support of the state's legalized prostitution industry. I think that's very appropriate. Anyway. Another story, and this is a little more serious from Alternet. Walmart got caught in court for shaving its workers' wages, where you would work so many hours for Walmart, when you got your paycheck, all the hours weren't there. And they got hit with a $187 million fine over wage theft, but they're still going to try and not have to pay it. Walmart is arguing that they want to go back into court, and each victim needs to get their own lawyer. Now, here's the problem with that. Lawyers are expensive. These workers can't afford them to begin with. Most lawyers will not take cases on contingency unless the case is open and shut. This is Walmart's way of simply tangling this up in the court system a little bit longer. And they got caught stealing from their own workers. And their attitude is certainly unrepentant. Yes, you caught us. But if you want your money that we stole from you, you're going to have to get your own lawyer, each and every one of you. which means that in an eventual settlement, the workers won't get the money anyway, the lawyers will. Now, here's a story out of 12160. The headline reads, Political Donors Control U.S. Universities. And we have seen recently multiple cases where university administrations are trying to tamp down on freedom of speech, particularly in the issue of Israel and Palestine. Because all these big donors need to do is call up the chancellor of the university and say, if you allow this to go ahead, you don't get a check next season. And that is certainly another covert form of the subversion of our university system. All right, we got a long-distance phone call here. Yuri in Bulgaria. Aloha, what is on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. I'm listening to your show for 3 years now, and the first time call.
Yes?
I have noticed that Al Gore and Climate Junta never mentioned war as the biggest greenhouse gas emitter.
No, yeah. I mean, they're showering depleted uranium around the world. They're blowing things up, but the global warming is all caused by your plastic bags.
Nice one. Single tank emits more greenhouse gases than 1,000 cars. And people go to work with the cars and create products we consume. And the tank destroy the products we consume.
What's really interesting, even though the United States developed the nuclear navy, that was Admiral Hyman G. Rickover's project, the U.S. has actually, except for aircraft carriers and submarines, they've gone back to just oil-fired ships, and they're pouring out all this greenhouse gas. We see warplanes from the Air Force bases flying around our head. One of those flights is using more gas than we go through in an entire year. But their carbon is good and your carbon is bad. I was looking at Detroit One Click. They're expecting snow for both Passover and Easter this weekend. I'm dreaming of a white Easter.
Okay. I wish you luck, and the world needs people like you.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words, and we're trying to stop this world war before they start coming up your driveway, okay?
Yeah, it will be hard, though.
All right. Well, listen, keep your head down. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, getting on back to education, and there is a major problem, of course, with all these student loans starting to go into default. It's another bubble, and they bundled those as well here. But Stanford University has now started a program where if your family is earning less than $125,000 a year and you are accepted as a student, you don't have to pay any tuition. If your family makes less than $65,000 a year, Stanford will pick up your room and board as well. And I think that's a really good idea because I would like to see our future generation of educated individuals not just be coming from the upper class, because that biases the decisions they're going to be making. Politics, business, what have you, we've already got too much of that, of the rich viewing the poor as a different species, not deserving of respect. Here's a very interesting story. This is over in Portage. It was being reported on Oraz.com. Where this lady was driving along, police car comes up behind her, flashes the lights and the siren, and instead of coming to a halt immediately, she drove short distance to a lit parking lot for safety because she wasn't sure it was a real police car. And the cop arrested her. Okay, now here's the kicker. The police department actually puts out a brochure, because there have been a lot of problems with criminals pretending to be police. Rent a uniform, quick paint job on the car, maybe not even that, pretend to be undercover. And the police department says if you're pulled over and it's dark and it's late and there's nobody around, just proceed slowly to a lit parking lot so you can be sure who you're dealing with. And the officer still arrested her. Now, remember we were talking about down in Tennessee, there was this prosecutor who was making sterilization a condition for a plea bargain. And the district attorney got wind of it and shut it down. Well, the good news is that prosecutor has been fired, and should have been. That's absolutely inappropriate conditions to put on somebody's plea bargain, that they allow themselves to be sterilized. Over in western Pennsylvania, there is a now retired judge who's pled guilty in a case where he had ordered police to keep seized cocaine in his judicial chambers instead of sending it to the police lockers, the evidence lockers. And whether he was just using it himself or he was selling it, but he's pled guilty and, oddly enough, sentenced in the same courthouse he used to work in. Story out of CBC up in Canada. There have been a lot of problems with police officers, and it's not just confined to Canada. Here in the U.S. as well. Police officers think those lights and siren give them a license to drive fast even when they're not chasing criminals, and there have been some accidents. And responding to one of those accidents, the Canadian government ordered GPS units to be installed in all the police cars, so if they're speeding, if they go over the local speed limit, it sends an automatic alert. But for some reason, the software has developed problems and they can't get the system to work. And they don't know when they'll actually get it back on there. So it's like those dashboard cams and the body cams. They don't work when you need them to work. It's kind of funny how that works out. American police have killed more people in March of this year than the entire British police force have killed since 1900. You just think about that. More Americans killed by police officers last month than the entire country of Great Britain since 1900. That'll tell you how out of control we are. Going to take a break. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. A couple of Stinky Badges stories we've got. Over in Leadwood, Missouri, there's police officer Jay Bellis. He is facing a felony child abuse charge, not sexual. Apparently, he lost his temper and he threw a 4-year-old child into a wall, causing him to hit his head on the kitchen cabinets. Kid was bleeding out of the ear. And he also had another case where he was injuring a child at a daycare center, whether he was picking his kid up. We don't really know. Here's the important part. He's facing these felony charges of physically abusing children. And he gets promoted to sergeant. That strikes me as a little weird. Now, story out of New Jersey involving a police officer accused of firebombing a house that killed 5 people. And looks like nothing's going to happen because the FBI laboratory is now claiming they lost the key piece of evidence against him. Now, contrary to what you see on TV and movies, the FBI are not this professional organization. Remember when Frederick Whitehurst was the head of the FBI lab, and he blew the whistle that the FBI lab routinely rigs lab test results to support the prosecution. The scandal resulted in hundreds of convictions being reviewed and overturned. And Frederick was demoted to head of the paint chip division. But we know the FBI, their job is to enforce the official dogma, not actually find out what's really going on. They were caught cheating and lying and fabricating evidence during the whole TWA 800 story. Alrighty, now then, let's see. Out in California, Governor Brown has ordered mandatory restrictions on water consumption in California. It's trying to attain a 25% reduction to deal with the current drought situation. The provisions include a reward program for people to rat out their neighbors for running their sprinklers during the day. Well, it shouldn't be running sprinklers at all. You have to use what's called drip irrigation now. Washing their cars and letting the water go down. I mean, serious situation there. They're going to get everybody spying on everybody else. Now, the bottled water companies, though, they're still doing business. They're still sucking millions of gallons out of the ground, processing it to put in these little bottles. They're not paying very much money for it. And the problem is that in the process of treating the water, they lose 2 gallons of water down the drain for every 1 gallon that winds up in those plastic bottles. It's not an efficient system. But Nestle's CEO is on record as saying water is not a basic human right. If you want to drink water, you will pay some corporation for it. I'm sure they'll be doing clean air next. And the carbon Nazis are out there saying, see, this drought out west proves human-caused global warming. No, it does not. The western half of the United States is a desert. It always has been. The green lifestyle of California is artificially maintained by a system of aqueducts and water mains and other such systems, and they are in poor repair. It is estimated that 23 billion gallons of usable water a year are leaking out through broken pipes and cracks in the aqueducts into places that do not need it. That's why it's not getting to those faucets. According to a 2008 report by the American Society of Civil Engineers, 2 of Colorado's top 3 infrastructural issues are roads and bridges. The third is drinking water. They have not been increasing the water system to keep up with the growth in population. Where is all the tax money going? It's going to the war machine. It's going to Israel. It's going to Wall Street. It's going into a lot of people's pockets. But our government in Washington, D.C. is so obsessed with pleasing Israel. They are allowing our nation to fall into disrepair. We were talking yesterday about this Society of Bridging Engineers saying there are now 15,000 bridges in the United States that are structurally deficient, meaning they can fall down, go boom. And one did in Texas a few days ago. And behind all of that was the revelation that 2 of the largest freshwater aquifers in California, where the water is usable for drinking or for farm irrigation, have now been contaminated with 3 billion gallons of fracking wastewater. The reason there's a water shortage in California has nothing to do with human-caused global warming. They're just going to try and find somebody to blame on that to duck the fact that they just weren't taking care of the nation. They're so busy taking care of Israel, they weren't taking care of the United States of America. They haven't maintained the water capture distribution system. They haven't expanded it to deal with the rapidly growing population. And that's why there's a water shortage now. Well, we'll just tell everybody to go thirsty. That'll solve the problem, right, Governor Brown? And our government is so captured by the large corporations that they'll just go along saying, oh, you're using too much water, it's global warming, it's all the rest of this stuff. They won't admit to the poor maintenance on the water distribution system, and they're refusing to discuss the problems with fracking getting into the well water. And it's not just in California, it's all across the country. Speaking of human-caused global warming, apparently there are these 2 guys, Seth Haley and Josh Nowicki, decided to have a round of golf on Lake Michigan. Apparently the ice there is still large enough and thick enough where they just went on out, set up a pin, and they were playing golf from one ice floe to the next. There's something you don't see every single day. Story coming out of Common Dreams. The claim that GMOs will end the threat of world famine has been debunked. The report, Feeding the World Without GMOs, is pointing out something we pointed out before. The GMO versions of the plants have lower yields than the natural varieties. They are less resistant to extremes of temperature and hydration, and so they tend to die more often. Just more and more and more. It's just all about dependence, forced dependence on GMO companies for your seeds. They're trying to monopolize food production so they can charge whatever prices they want for the future. Anyway, we'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we take these phone calls here, we're already getting a statement from the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who is saying that the claims about the framework agreement that they have been watching Kerry and Obama make in the American media are not what is actually in the document the negotiators agreed to. No big shock. We know our government lies to us, but apparently they've been putting out all these wonderful things they've accomplished with Iran that Iran did not agree to. And so now they're coming out and saying already they're spinning it. They're trying to change the agreement after it's been agreed to. And, of course, the reason they do that is down the road they'll say, well, Iran agreed to this. You all heard me tell you that, and they're refusing to go along with it. And therefore, the sanctions will stay and the war is on. But apparently the government of Iran is calling them on that one. And given that it wasn't Iran that was lying to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons, I'm going to take this guy's word above that of Obama. All right, let's grab some phone calls here. Brian in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, this is completely off subject because I didn't get a chance to listen to your show because I just got off work a few minutes ago. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was that I read in the paper this morning something that made me actually shake my head was that this, a guy who had I guess he's 59 years old. He's been collecting guns his whole life. Okay, well, he had a girlfriend that got mad at him. So what she did was she I guess after they broke up, she called the police and said that he had stole all these guns. And when you hear the number of the guns that he had, it was amazing. He had 306 guns.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was is I guess she said all this stuff, how he abused her and everything. So she got a temporary restraining order.
Mm-hmm.
And the sheriff's department came, went and took all those guns. It took him 6 hours to just get all the guns out of his house. Most of them were antiques. Most of them were made in the early 1900s. And none of them were stolen. Nothing was wrong. And then whenever they went to court, okay, the judge just completely threw it out, was like, what the heck is this crap, you crazy lady? And what made me shake my head was that they sent him a bill for $1,200 to get his guns back.
That sounds about right. And
yeah, I couldn't believe it. It was just crazy. And then he had to provide his own means to get the guns. They wouldn't do anything. He had to come and get every single one of them, and he lived an hour away from the courthouse where they were stored in their security deposit or whatever.
Well,
it was.
he ought to sue his ex-girlfriend. I mean, he's now got a court decision.
That's what I was thinking.
That she lied to the police. She filed a false police report that got him into this trouble, and she should compensate him for the $1,200 bill to get his guns back and whatever it cost him to actually transport them. And
that's what I was thinking, but I don't know if it'll happen or not. But, but I just wanted to let you know because I thought that was a messed up story that you should know about.
Well, unfortunately, in our culture, the messed up story is becoming the norm. I mean, this country is just so totally messed up right now with all this. Well, like the cop who's whooping on a 4-year-old and he gets promoted to sergeant. Anyway, Brian, we're running out of time. Thank you for the phone call. I'm going to let you go, and we're going to take Ralph in Michigan. Aloha, Ralph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I was listening to you talk about infrastructure of the highways and so forth, and it just brought to mind that, we live out here in the country, and I think there's about 10 houses on our whole road. There's a dirt road. Every once a year they'd grade it, and we'd be happy with it. But they had to come through and pave it. Now, they're looking for money to do these main roads. Why don't they take the money that wait a minute, they didn't use any money. They taxed us and made us pay extra money to get this done, which nobody wanted. Let's see, there was a trailer park that moved in down the end of the road, and a couple businesses opened up because taxes were cheaper, and they wanted the road paved. So, regardless what all the residents said that live here, which were, we all live on farms, they went ahead and paved it. Isn't that sweet? Oh, and by the way, the drainage ditches that we all dug and put in, years ago, now we're getting charged another $200 in taxes, each and every one of us. Oh, to keep the drainage ditches clear. Oh, well, guess what? They don't do anything to our drainage ditches. We still have to go out there with the chainsaw and clean them out ourselves. It was where the drainage ditch drained into another drainage ditch that a subdivision went in, and they want to keep that nice and clear because they call it Maple Creek.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff like this happen. I remember when I was living in North Hollywood, and they were starting to do the North Hollywood redevelopment. The subway station was coming in there, and there were these companies that wanted to buy up entire blocks and build a whole new building and center and investment and everything. And there was this one building where all the store owners had been there for a long time, and they didn't want to sell. And so for some strange reason, the street got torn up in front of their stores and was just sawhorses, and it just sat there for month after month after month. Nobody could get to this building easily until all those store owners had been driven out of business, and the big corporation got the property that they wanted. These things do happen, unfortunately.
You want to hear something even funnier?
Yeah.
Now that they got our road paved, we used to drive down at 25 miles an hour until we got onto the main highway. Everybody was happy. Now we got a bunch of yahoos going up and down here like it's a drag strip because, we don't get that much traffic. There's, like I said, 10 houses there.
Yeah.
But we got these yahoos driving up here like it's a drag strip. Oh, and by the way, the drainage ditches that's supposed to drain all the water away, well, guess what? Our ditches are now full because, in the meantime, all these kids moved into this subdivision, I guess, and they were afraid that because of the flowing rapid waters during heavy rain, that water got too full in there. So guess what they did? They put dams in, little dams in.
Well, we're almost to a commercial break. I'm going to share one more story with you. This is when I was living in Washington State. There was this park up in the mountains, and they wanted to put in this environmentally friendly restroom facility that was solar powered. And so they built it all in there, and it didn't work because they built it underneath this gigantic tree. But they wanted to be environmentally friendly. So to get it to work, they cut the tree down. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, listen, Ralph, I got to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break. I got a few more stories I need to get to, and before we hit the end of the show here. Now, down in the Philippines, there's an agricultural organization down there that has rejected entreaties by a pro-GMO group to allow golden rice into that nation. Now, golden rice has become very controversial. It was first created to double the content of beta-carotene, and as we were reporting yesterday, it's not being well accepted. It's not actually producing the beta-carotene that they were hoping it would. It's being touted as the solution to world famine, but again, it doesn't produce any more rice than natural rice. So this Filipino organization, Masipag, has managed to thwart the GMO front group, Allow Golden Rice Now, and the Philippine government is saying, I think we'll stick with what we already know. And that's a very wise thing to do. And Monsanto is wailing and gnashing its teeth and saying, we're all rejecting the future. Why don't we trust Monsanto? And that's because we've caught Monsanto lying so many times. We have no guarantees these products are safe, and Monsanto's word is worthless because of the times we have caught them lying about their products. And they're not going to get the trust of the population back. Got another story here coming out of Health Impact News, where apparently U.S. Right to Know is looking into the possibility that U.S. government scientists, particularly in the USDA, are being deliberately censored on research about glyphosate and GMO not being as safe as Monsanto likes to claim they are. Our government isn't looking out for we the people. They're looking out for we the Monsanto, we the General Motors, we the Wall Street. And that is fascism. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here, final segment of our program today before we get on out of here. Earlier I was talking about these golfers who are golfing on the ice that's on Lake Michigan. Now, the ice is starting to break up, obviously. We're into April. But it is still considerably higher than normal. And as a result, shipping is starting, but it's suffering delays. It still has to move around the really big chunks. And businesses that are using much smaller boats are still harbor-bound because of the volume of ice on the Great Lakes. Story coming out of the Telegraph in Great Britain. There are allegations that drug manufacturers are trying to derail trials of a new drug, which is very inexpensive, 65 pounds a dose, to treat macular degenerative blindness. And the pharmaceutical companies have their own drug for that illness that costs 10 times as much. They don't want there to be affordable medications. They just want to gouge and gouge and gouge. Profits over people. It's obviously affecting Great Britain as well as here in the United States of America. Interesting revelation coming from the CDC. More teenagers are dying from prescription drugs than illegal recreational drugs in the United States of America. And apparently there is, in most cases, misuse, accidental overdose. And this does not even address the known and documented link between prescription antidepressants and suicidal behavior. Now, we had a caller earlier on the show who was talking about this shaken baby syndrome. It's a name they came up with to explain symptoms of young babies who had just been vaccinated and seem to have an adverse reaction. But we can never blame the vaccines. The vaccines are perfect. The vaccines are sent down from above, from the gods of medication. We don't ever question those. But there is actually no clinical definition of shaken baby syndrome. There is no medical test that can be done where there's a little meter that says, yes, this baby was shaken. It's something they've come up with to protect the vaccine profits. And can you imagine how cold-hearted it is? You have two parents whose baby has become deathly ill, possibly died. And on top of that trauma, you turn around and you say, oh, this is all your fault. And you're going to go to jail. You murdered your own child. But apparently they're doing it. It's just like all these kids who are coming down with measles or mumps or flu after getting the measles, mumps, and flu vaccines. And they turn around and they say, oh, it's the fault of the people who wouldn't get the vaccine. If they had the vaccine, how do they come down with the same illness? 90% of the people who came down with measles in this last outbreak had been vaccinated. At the very least, we can say the vaccine does not work. But the numbers seem to indicate the vaccine is causing the illness, because attenuated virus vaccines tend to revert back to full potency. It was a big problem with the oral polio vaccine. The vaccine was actually giving people the illness. And maybe doing it again. They've got a whole bunch of people getting the polio vaccine who are developing polio symptoms, but the doctors are saying, yeah, it looks just like polio. It's got all the symptoms of polio, but trust us, it can't be polio because you have the vaccine. And National Geographic asks why we don't trust science any longer. Up in New York, 9 doctors have been arrested for running a Medicaid scam. They would go out on the streets, they would grab homeless people, say, you're now my patient, and they would send them for all these tests and lab studies and everything, all billed to Medicaid, hundreds and thousands of dollars per person. And then after it was all done, they'd send them back to the street with a brand new pair of shoes. I mean, the homeless, got a little something for it. So, 9 New York doctors. And it's not just doctors. 11 teachers have been convicted for defrauding the U.S. government by inflating test scores. Because under this whole Common Core program, if your students do not pass the designated tests, your funding gets cut off. Now, one of the reasons the kids can't pass these tests is because the way Common Core is teaching basic skills is entirely bogus. And by the way, the teachers are not allowed to show the parents what is in these textbooks. And the students are discouraged from talking to their parents about what's going on. And we've seen all these videos and demonstrations of how Common Core is teaching basic math skills like subtraction. It is the most obfuscated, bogus way. And along with indoctrination to believe in human-caused global warming and believe in American exceptionalism, they're literally handicapping our children because they're teaching them to solve problems with these very obfuscated roundabout, inefficient ways. It's like Tom Lehrer with his humorous song about new math. This is new math squared. And it really doesn't work. And Common Core just seems to be about indoctrination. They're teaching poor ways to solve problems. And then when the kids can't pass the tests, they're saying we're going to cut your funding. And I'm not surprised in a situation like that these teachers were inflating test scores, but they got caught at it. And I think public education ought to be about what's in the public's best interest, not the money junkies and not the government. And we know the public school system all began with the Prussian model. Take the kids away from the parents so they don't get bad ideas. Put them in a school where they'll grow up to believe what the government wants them to believe. That's the origin of public education. But it needs to get back to basic skill building. Reading, writing, mathematics, science, engineering, logic, all the things that make an intellectual mind a threat to the current political system. I remember when I was involved in teaching many, many years ago, the high school level, and I listened in on how they were teaching history. And it was name, place, date, name, place, date, name, place, date. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And the students would come out of that class with a name, a place, and a date and think they understood history. And what was not being taught in that class was the cause and effect. Why did Columbus make the voyage? How did the royalty of Spain cheat him out of the fame for it initially? Because it's that cause and effect that is the dance of history. But they don't want kids to look at that, because then they might look at the news and start looking for cause and effect there. How did this event get us to this result? And that's when the propaganda stops working, when kids are thinking like that. If I'd been fortunate enough to have a child, biggest disappointment in my life, I would homeschool. I would absolutely not want my kid in Common Core. Now they're trying to outlaw homeschooling. Now they're trying to say that only people with a teacher certificate can homeschool. And even if you homeschool, your kid has to pass the Common Core tests. They want control of the next generation of Americans. And it's another way. That earlier caller was saying the United States is turning into the new Nazi power. Because the Nazis did that too. Isolate the kids, indoctrinate them, turn the kids against the parent, get the kids to rat on the parents to the Gestapo if the parents are not 100% in love with the government. We're getting there as well. Common Core is teaching kids to go into your family's, rooms, see if they have firearms, bring the report back to us. We really are mimicking virtually everything that the Nazis did to Germany. And I fear that if we do not stand up and scream out in protest against it, that our nation is going to go through what Germany did when they lost the World War, and there was massive starvation and hardship and global revulsion. And I do not want that for future generations of Americans. There's our music. It is time to get out of here, get some animation work done, pay a few bills. We will be back tomorrow, live, Friday, Good Friday, start of Passover, here on the Genesis Communication Network. So until then, stay informed, make good choices, be skeptical, allow yourself to be angry and outraged. We evolved to feel those emotions for a reason. They are necessary for our survival against that which threatens us. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.